There's a hill in Shaanxi province with pomegranate trees growing on it, and under it sits a sealed room no living person has ever seen. Radar and resistivity surveys put the burial chamber at roughly 80 meters by 50, about 30 meters down. The roof has not collapsed. The groundwater never got in. The soil on top reads roughly 100 times hotter for Mercury than the fields beside it. So why has China spent 50 years digging up 8,000 clay soldiers around that hill and never once cut into the hill itself? There's a government rule with a date on it, and behind that rule sits one specific dig that went badly wrong the last time China opened a sealed emperor's tomb. How does a country end up making a rule like that? It starts with a hole in a field in Beijing, and it ends with a chemistry problem nobody has solved yet. The mound sits in Lintong district, about 30 kilometers northeast of Xi'an, and from the parking lot it looks like farmland, with a rise in the middle. It is not impressive from the road. That's part of why it took so long for anyone to take the old accounts seriously. The base measures about 380 meters by 330, and the mound stands somewhere around 51 meters today, worn down by 2,000 years of rain and farming. Underneath, the picture changes completely. Between 2002 and 2003, a project inside China's National High Technology Research and Development Program, the one everyone calls the 863 program, threw everything modern at that mound. Panchromatic imaging, color infrared, hyperspectral scanning with a thermal band, soil spectrum testing, temperature, humidity, composition, three-dimensional mapping. The results were published by Tan and colleagues in the International Journal of Remote Sensing in 2006. Then the geophysicists went in underneath. Liu Shiyi and his team, working with the mausoleum's own archaeological director, ran electrical resistivity, magnetic and gravity surveys, radon measurement, and self-potential surveys across the mound. They presented the findings at the Society of Exploration Geophysicists' annual meeting in New Orleans in 2006. Here is what those instruments say is down there. An underground palace roughly 140 meters by 110, about 30 meters deep. Inside it, a central coffin chamber around 80 meters by 50 and about 15 meters tall, with its ceiling roughly 30 meters below the surrounding ground. The resistivity anomalies mapped the chamber. The gravity anomalies found the outer boundary and located an unknown passage leading in. And two of those readings matter more than all the rest. The radon and resistivity results said the main structure of the grave chamber has not collapsed. The self-potential survey said the watertight barriers are still doing their job. Read that again. 2,200 years underground, and the ceiling is still up. That is not how ancient tombs usually behave. Most of them flood, sag, and come down on themselves within a few centuries. This one is intact, which means whatever was placed inside is still lying roughly where it was placed. That's the prize. It's also the problem. And it's worth saying plainly how uncertain this was before those surveys ran. The geophysics team opened their own paper by admitting there had been real doubt among archaeologists over whether an underground palace existed beneath the surviving mound at all. Everyone knew the mound was artificial. Nobody could prove there was a room in it. The soldiers in the pits had been famous worldwide for nearly 30 years, while the central question stayed open. There was also a detail in the gravity data that gets less attention than it deserves. Alongside the chamber and the boundary, the survey located a path leading to the grave that nobody knew about. So, there is a way in. It has been mapped. Its coordinates are sitting in a conference paper from 2006, and the door at the end of it has stayed shut for 20 years since. Something is holding the line there, and it's written down. So what did the people who built it actually say was in there? Everything we think we know comes from one man, writing about 100 years after the funeral. Sima Qian was the court historian of the Han Dynasty, and his account of the burial is short, specific, and strange. He wrote that when the first emperor took the throne, work began at Mount Li, and that after unification, more than 700,000 workers were sent from across the empire. They dug through 3 springs and poured in molten bronze for the outer coffin. Palaces and towers for 100 officials were built underground and filled with rare objects. Then the parts that made the account famous. Craftsmen were ordered to make crossbows and arrows primed to fire at anyone who entered. Mercury was used to represent the 100 rivers, the Yangtze, the Yellow River, and the Great Sea, and it was set to flow mechanically. Above were the constellations of the heavens, below the features of the land. Candles were made from the fat of a manfish, calculated to burn a very long time without going out. There's one more line in that account, and it explains why no plan of the chamber has ever existed. Sima Qian wrote that when the burial was finished, the inner gate was closed, with people still inside, so that nobody who knew the layout could ever describe it. Whether or not you take the number in the text at face value, the point of it is clear. The design was meant to stay in the ground with everything else. That is why we have no floor plan of the chamber. There was never one to lose. The design was sealed in with the site. For most of the 20th century, serious scholars treated that passage the way you'd treat a tall tale told at a funeral. Nobody had entered the tomb. Sima Qian hadn't either. The rivers of Mercury were treated as decoration. If you're wondering why nobody just went in and checked, so was everyone else. Then two geologists decided to test it from the outside. Chang Yong and Li Tong came to the mausoleum twice with soil augers, and they sampled the mound itself and the ordinary ground around it. Their preliminary study ran in the journal Archaeology in 1983. The full method paper, Application of Mercury Survey Technique over the Mausoleum of Emperor Qin Shi Huang, appeared in the Journal of Geochemical Exploration in 1985. What they found was a strong, well-defined mercury anomaly in the soil samples from the central part of the mound. The samples from the surrounding fields showed almost nothing. That single result changed the status of the whole account. A historian's dramatic paragraph became a testable claim, and the dirt agreed with him. And it got stranger when they mapped where the mercury sat. Lu Shiyi, the researcher from the China Geological Survey, explained that the geophysical work confirmed significant mercury anomalies inside the underground palace, and that the concentrations run strong in the southeast and southwest and weak in the northeast and northwest. If that distribution really is meant to be rivers and seas, then the pattern lines up with the real geography of China's Bohai Sea and Yellow Sea. Sit with that for a second. Someone poured a map of the empire's coastline into a room in liquid metal, and the shape of it may still be readable from the soil above. And this is where the story stops being about an old book. The soil work could have been the end of it. It wasn't. In the summer of 2016, between July 24th and August 12th, a team led by the Swedish physicist Sune Svanberg parked a mobile laser radar system near the mound. The instrument is a differential absorption LiDAR, built largely for this purpose by the Applied Laser Spectroscopy Group at South China Normal University. It can map atomic mercury in open air out to about a kilometer. They measured from 3 positions around the mound, in weather that reached 35 degrees Celsius in the day and stayed near 30 at night, because heat drives mercury out of the ground. Their results were published in Scientific Reports in 2020. The general pollutant level around Xi'an came in around 5 to 10 nanograms per cubic meter. Above the mound, in specific spots, the instrument read up to 27. The hotspots matched the locations of the old soil anomalies on the western and southern slopes. The team estimated an outflow of roughly 500 millionths of a kilogram per second. In plain terms, the hill is breathing mercury into the air, right now, and you can measure it from a parking lot. The authors wrote that highly volatile mercury may be escaping through cracks that developed in the structure over time, and that their investigation supports the ancient records on a tomb which is believed never to have been opened or looted. That last clause is the one people skip. Never opened, never looted. There's a reason that matters more than the mercury does, and we'll come back to it. If 100 times background sounds high, wait until you hear what that implies about the volume. So how much of the stuff is down there? Nobody knows. And the honest answer is a range so wide it tells you how little anyone can see. A geochemical study of the mausoleum's mercury asked a blunt question. If water from the mountain really was replaced by mercury to make rivers, as the documents describe, how much metal would that take? The answer the authors reached was somewhere between 300 and 2,500 tons. Then they asked the question almost nobody asks. Where would it have come from? Cinnabar is the ore. You roast it, and mercury comes off. The nearest deposit, at Sunyang in Shaanxi, could not have supplied anything like those quantities. So the study points instead toward the giant geochemical block at Yoyang in what is now Chongqing, roughly 1,000 kilometers away by the roots of the time. Think about the logistics of that for a second. Forget the tomb, look at the supply chain. Thousands of workers roasting ore in another province, mercury moving overland in sealed containers, for years, to fill a room nobody was ever meant to enter again. And the emperor who ordered it spent the last part of his life drinking mercury compounds on the advice of his court alchemists, because the same metal was believed to grant eternal life. He died in 210 BC. Researchers on that Swedish study noted his death was probably caused by mercury poisoning. He was chasing immortality, and the chase most likely killed him. That's just what the record says. There's one clause in the old account that nobody has been able to test, and it's the one that keeps people up at night. Sima Qian didn't only write that mercury was placed in the tomb. He wrote that it was set to flow mechanically. Something was supposed to move it. Nobody knows what that mechanism was, whether it was a pumped system, or a slope in a channel, or whether any part of it survived. What the instruments can say is narrower and stranger. The mercury is still there in quantity, it is still volatile, and it is still finding its way out through cracks in a structure that has been shifting for 22 centuries. A vapor that measurable, that long after the fact, means a lot of liquid metal is still sitting in an enclosed space with nowhere to go. And that's the version of the problem the people who would have to open it are actually looking at. It's a chemistry problem, and there's a disaster they can point to. Which brings us to Beijing, and the actual answer to the question in the title. Because in 1956, one dig made the decision for everybody who came after. In the mid-1950s, a group of prominent scholars led by Guo Moruo and the historian Wu Han began pushing to excavate Dingling, the tomb of the Yongle emperor and the oldest of the Ming tombs. They wanted the lost volumes of a vast encyclopedia. Premier Zhou Enlai approved the plan. Archaeologists pushed back, because Dingling was too important to risk, so a smaller target was chosen as a practice run. The practice run was Dingling, the tomb of the Wanli emperor, built between 1584 and 1590, at a cost of more than 8 million taels of silver, sealed since 1620. They opened it in 1956 and finished clearing it in 1957. The underground palace ran 1,195 square meters. More than 3,000 objects came out, including a gold filigree crown and a phoenix crown set with thousands of pearls and gems. And then the objects met the 20th century. The silk was the disaster. Thousands of pieces of textile, some of the finest surviving work of the Ming dynasty, had been sitting in stable darkness for over 300 years. Nobody in China at that time had the conservation chemistry to stabilize them. Several preservation experiments were tried and failed. In the end, the surviving textiles were piled into a storage room that leaked water and wind. The excavation report was rushed. The politics around it got worse. Wu Han, one of the two men who had pushed hardest for the dig, became an early target of the Cultural Revolution and died in prison in 1969. In 1966, the museum was stormed, and the imperial remains and many artifacts were destroyed. Dingling is still the only intact imperial tomb ever excavated in the People's Republic. It is also the reason no other one has been. If that dig had gone differently, the Qin chamber would almost certainly be open by now, and we'd be arguing about what came out of it instead of what might be in it. That is the real answer. Not crossbows, not curses, a storage room with a leaking roof. That rule is a notice on cultural relics work, issued by China's State Council in 1997, and it suspended proactive excavation of large imperial mausoleums. It didn't ban them forever. It stopped them and left the door open for later. Every Chinese archaeologist working on the Qin mausoleum today can recite the reasoning behind it without looking it up. If you cannot preserve it, you do not lift it. What that notice actually did was flip the default. Before it, an important tomb was a research opportunity, and the question was, who got to lead the dig? After it, an intact imperial mausoleum is left alone unless something forces the issue, and the work moves to everything around it. Survey it, map it, excavate the outbuildings, the satellite pits, the walls, the drainage, publish, wait. That's why the last 50 years at this site look the way they do. An enormous amount of digging, none of it in the one place everybody actually wants to see. And the waiting isn't passive. In 2017, the museum launched a digital version of the site built on a panoramic image running to 20 billion pixels. So the surviving color on figures that have already been treated can be studied and shown without anyone touching them again. That's the direction the whole field is moving. They want the information without having to lift anything again. Nobody is pretending that solves the chamber. It does show what the field does instead of opening things, while the chemistry catches up. And if you want to know how seriously they take that rule, look at what already happened to the soldiers. Every one of the terracotta figures was painted, across every pit, in a palette of red, green, blue, yellow, purple, brown, white, and black, plus blended shades. The color went on over a ground layer of qi lacquer, a processed tree sap with egg used as a binder. Xia Yin, who directs relics protection at the Emperor Qin Shi Huang's Mausoleum Site Museum, has described what happens when a painted figure comes out of the wet earth. The pigments start changing about 15 seconds after they're unearthed. Within 4 minutes, the paint layers dehydrate, tilt, and break away from the surface. That was the warning, and it arrived in 1974, On the first day, anyone lifted a painted figure out of the ground. Nobody at the time understood what it meant for the chamber. 15 seconds. That's the window. The lacquer is organic and hates a drop in humidity. The pigment on top is mineral, and when the lacquer shrinks, it takes the color with it. 2,000 years of survival, gone in the length of a commercial break. One of those colors is worth stopping on. The purple on those statues is not a mineral anyone dug up. It's synthetic barium copper silicate, a manufactured pigment, now called Chinese purple, and it does not occur in nature, making it requires precise high-temperature chemistry. The technique disappeared after the Han Dynasty, and even today it is difficult to reproduce. So archaeologists watched a lost color they cannot make, on figures they cannot repaint, come apart in front of them in real time. Conservators fought back. In the 1990s, the museum began working with chemists at the Technical University of Munich, and the conservator, Katharina Blansdorf, spent years reconstructing the original schemes from paint fragments. The current field method is a spray of polyethylene glycol the moment a painted surface appears, replacing the moisture in the lacquer, followed by plastic film to hold humidity, then transfer to an on-site laboratory. The most colorful pieces get lifted with the surrounding earth still around them. It works, partly. The trade-off is that PEG darkens the figures, so they come out duller than they went in. And if the moisture evaporates faster than the solution can be applied, the lacquer cracks anyway. So the best fix for losing the color is a treatment that dims the color. Nobody at that museum is thrilled about it. That is the state of the art, on figures sitting in open pits, in ordinary soil, with no toxic vapor in the room. Now imagine doing that 30 meters down, in a sealed chamber, in air that has been measured leaking mercury for 2,000 years, on materials nobody has ever handled from that context. That's the excavation nobody is signing off on. The engineering under the mound makes the case even harder, and it's the part of this story almost nobody outside China has heard. In 2003, Duan Qingbo, who led the mausoleum's archaeological team, announced that surveying had found a thick, finely compacted earthen wall wrapped around the burial chamber. The team called them palace walls. Verified, they run about 168 meters east to west and 141 meters north to south. The southern wall is 16 meters thick. The northern wall is 22. The wall was built by pounding down layer after layer of fine soil, each layer only 5 to 6 centimeters thick. Duan said the top surface sits well above the ground level of the Qin period, reaching down to about 33 meters below the current mound, and that the whole wall stands roughly 30 meters high. On the inner face of it, the team found a second wall, this one of stone, 30 meters of hand-compacted earth in 5-centimeter layers, wrapped in a rectangle bigger than a football field, with a stone wall inside it. And it worked. Duan pointed out that the Guangdong region has taken earthquakes of magnitude 8 and above, and the burial chamber is still standing. He tied that directly to the walls. Then there's the water. His team traced a water blocking and drainage channel running nearly a kilometer, which is really a dam. Its base is a 17-meter thick layer of highly waterproof blue clay, with an 84-meter wide layer of loess pounded down on top. The site drops 85 meters from the high southeast to the low northwest, and the dam sits across that slope, cutting off groundwater before it can reach the chamber. That is a civil engineering project built to hold back a water table forever, and 2,200 years later, the Self-Potential Survey says it is still holding. Sima Qian wrote that they dug through 3 springs. Duan's reading is that the 3 is a rough number, a way of saying they kept hitting water and kept going. So the tomb isn't just buried under a hill, it's protected by engineering, and the engineering is still working. Which raises the question of what the crossbow story is doing in this at all. Duan Qingbo did not believe the builders put mercury in there as a trap for robbers, and Sima Qian never said they did. The mercury was a map, or an elixir, or both. But the historian was explicit about the crossbows, and nobody can rule them out from the outside, because nobody has been inside. Whether a 2,000-year-old trigger could still fire is a question with no test behind it, only opinions. And the modern dangers are not guesswork at all. Mercury vapor is a neurotoxin. A sealed chamber that has been leaking vapor since before Rome had an emperor is a confined space problem before it is an archaeology problem. There's one more thing the mercury may have done, and it's the quietest detail in the whole story. The rebel leader, Xiang Yu, is said by Sima Qian to have burned and looted the mausoleum grounds around 206 BC, and there is fire damage in parts of the complex. But Wu Yongqi, the former director of the Museum of Qin Terracotta Warriors and Horses, has said he believes the burial chamber itself was never disturbed. The Swedish team's paper says the same thing from the physics side. So consider the possibility. Robbers reached the complex, they took what they could, and whatever they found at the entrance to the chamber, a stone wall, a bronze seal, or a smell they couldn't name, was enough to turn them around. The poison the emperor drank, looking for immortality, may be the thing that gave his tomb 2,000 extra years. And that's what makes this different from every other famous burial. Tutankhamun's tomb had already been entered by robbers in ancient times before Howard Carter ever reached it. The Great Pyramids were emptied so long ago that nobody knows what was in them. Practically every royal grave in the ancient world was found by someone who got there first and took what they wanted. This one, as far as every instrument pointed at it can tell, was not. So nobody is really asking what might be left in there. They're asking what a completely undisturbed imperial burial from 210 BC actually looks like, and no living archaeologist has ever seen one. There's also a reason archaeologists are so confident the chamber is worth this much caution, and it has nothing to do with gold. Duan Qingbo spent decades excavating what surrounds the tomb, and the conclusion he reached is that the whole underground complex is a copy of the emperor's living court. It's laid out like a working government. The famous army is only the military department. Other pits held terracotta officials, musicians, acrobats, and strongmen, stable pits with real horse remains, a pit of stone armor, and bronze waterfowl arranged along an artificial watercourse, cranes and swans and geese, some of them positioned as if feeding. Roughly 100 wooden battle chariots have been found across the complex. His team also found the ruins of 3 of the oldest and largest Q towers in China, gate towers marking a ceremonial approach. Read as a set, those pits are a state, army, court entertainers, civil officials, transport, ceremonial gates. Every branch of the Qin government, buried in miniature, in the right relative position, facing a chamber in the middle that nobody has entered. Duan also excavated a large, double-ramped noble tomb inside the mausoleum precinct that ranks second in importance only to the emperor's own. If the outbuildings of a complex hold a full working model of how an empire ran itself, the argument for patience at the center gets much easier to make. Whatever is in that chamber isn't one artifact. It's the key to reading everything already dug up around it. And the scale is easy to lose sight of. The burial complex covers about 35 square miles. The soldiers were found by accident on the 29th of March, 1974, by farmers digging a well. 50 years of work later, here's where the counting stands. Pit 1 alone runs 230 meters long and 62 meters wide and has produced around 6,000 figures and horses. Li Gang, director of the site museum, estimates the total across all 3 pits will approach 8,000. Just over 2,000 have actually been excavated and restored. 50 years. A quarter of the army, and it is still producing. In December 2024, in Pit 2, the excavation team unearthed a life-size figure of a senior military commander wearing an elaborate headdress and patterned armor with ribbon knots, hands clasped in front of him. Zhu Xihong, who heads the project, told CCTV that based on where it stood, they believe it was the highest-ranking commander of that unit. It's the first commander ever found in Pit 2 since formal excavation there began in 1994, and only about 10 high-level officer figures are known from the whole site. It came out alongside 2 chariots, 3 horses, and more figures. In 2025, the same pit gave up 2 more chariots, 15 pieces of chariot and horse gear, and 9 weapons. The craftsmanship keeps embarrassing modern assumptions too. Ma Shengtao of the Site Museum has pointed out that the 2 famous bronze chariots are made of more than 6,500 separate parts, joined by 17 different connection methods, with reins built from gold and silver tubes welded together, and that nobody has fully worked out how that welding was done. The pits keep giving things up. The chamber hasn't given up anything yet, because nobody has been in to ask it, which is where the whole thing sits tonight. The instruments have told us the room is there, the size of it, that the roof is up, that the water is out, and that something inside is still giving off metal vapor. Every one of those facts came from outside the wall. There's a hill in Shaanxi with pomegranate trees on it, and the trees are the point. They keep growing because nobody wants to be the person who opened it too early. The rule from 1997 could be lifted tomorrow, and what it's waiting on is a way to bring a color out of the ground that survives longer than 15 seconds. Nobody has that yet. So the Mercury keeps rising off the mound, the LiDAR keeps reading it from 100 meters away, and the room underneath stays exactly the way it was left in 210 BC. If you want to see what happens when we do get inside a sealed chamber and the technology is finally ready for it, that story is on screen now.